and girls to ensure the lasting protection of the planet and its natural resources.
Honorable judges, we appeal to you to help this universal peace process in larger freedom with the power of your pen and by holding the states accountable in fulfillment of their duties and responsibilities as they have adopted new global sustainable development goals. Be the voice of the voiceless. Truly, we are the last generation that can save this planet and the first generation that can end poverty in all its forms. Thank you.
Two subjects were then presented to the audience. Subject 1: Combating Child Labor in Modern Societies, a challenge towards the welfare of humanity and future generations. Speaker: Honorable Justice Dr. Adel Omar Sharif, Deputy Chief Justice, Supreme Constitutional Court of Egypt.
Today, child labor is considered a far-reaching problem, especially for children living in poverty around the world. Perhaps exploring some of the findings and already published facts about child labor would show us how serious this phenomenon has become. Let me go through some of these published facts. About 155 million children worldwide are victims of child labor. Almost 90 million are boys and 65 million are girls. Girls may be more present and less visible and therefore underreported forms of child labor, such as domestic service in private households. Girls who leave school early do so disproportionately to undertake responsibility for cause within their own homes, while boys are more likely to leave school prematurely in order to join the labor force. 48% of all victims of child labor are aged between 5 and 10 and 11 years. Almost half of child labor victims, that is about 75 million, work in hazardous child labor. More than 1/4 of all hazardous child labor is done by children less than 12 years old. Almost half of child workers are in Africa, talking about 75 million. 41% are in Asia and the Pacific. That is almost 65 million. 19% of child labor victims live in low-income countries, and 2 million victims live in high-income countries. There is a strong correlation between child labor and situation of conflict and disaster. The incidence of child labor in countries affected by armed conflict is 77% higher than global average.
Sir, as education is a major point of concern for all nations, what steps are taken in your country to promote education?
In my country, education is free. So everybody has access to education, not only at the primary level, but up to the university level. I myself have received free education throughout all the the entire circle of the educational ranks. So I started primary school, secondary school, university, all of them were free, and still the case, yeah. Apparently there are private university where you can attend for fees, against fees, but still the state guarantee under the constitution of Egypt the opportunity for each citizen to have free education.
Subject 2. Need for a new world order and creation of world parliament to enact enforceable world law. Speaker Honorable Mr. Justice Anthony Thomas Aquinas, 5th President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago from 2013 to 2018.
Problem solving. It pays particular attention to informing successful multilateral negotiations on creating or reforming global institutions and to engage in more effectively new transnational actors from the private sector and civil society, end of quote. A new world order and world parliament through effective global governance will allow us to end armed conflict, deal with new and emerging problems such as technological risk, the excessive use of artificial intelligence associated with the fourth industrial revolution, climate change, rumors of war and conflict between and among nations, and to achieve levels of prosperity, progress, and happiness that we all aspire to. You see, ladies and gentlemen, in the call for a new world order, the question which invariably arises is whether or not the existing world order is broken or dysfunctional or in need of total repair. In order to answer this question comprehensively, one has to look and take a look at history, more particularly the aftermath of the Second World War, which resulting in devastating social, economic, and environmental consequences for humanity. It resulted in the creation of a new world order then, where the terms and lines of engagement were created by the victors of the war. What is often referred to as the Western Alliance, with the then Soviet Union and others partitioning the world in their own image and likeness. The vanquished Nazis in Germany and others did not have a say as it related to the division of the world and its spoils. All of this taking place at the Berlin Conference, which despite its name took place in Potsdam, Germany. On the financial and economic side, led again by the United States, the Bretton Woods Agreement triggered the creation of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. This was further supplemented by the US establishing a Marshall Plan for the building and redevelopment of Europe, and similar plans were not put in place for other regions of the globe affected by the war. Very importantly, and as well as a consequence of the leadership in the US, with the support of others, we witnessed the creation of the United Nations, a multilateral mechanism to prevent the world from once again becoming a victim to the scourge of war. It further resulted in the creation of another mechanism for the peaceful settlement of disputes by way of the International Court of Justice, as well as other UN organisms geared towards decolonization and economic development. Of critical importance was the creation of the General Assembly based on the sovereign equality of states, whether big or small, the developed or developing, each state being entitled to one vote in that organ. This, however, was in stark contrast to what obtained in the organ called the Security Council, comprising 5 states that were deemed permanent members, namely Russia, which replaced the Soviet Union, the US, China, France, and the United Kingdom, all victors of the Second World War, as compared to the non-permanent election of 10 other nation states.
my name is Fatma Zehra, and I would like to ask a question from the Honorable Sir Anthony Thomas. At times it seems that our world is on the brink of World War III. Sir, do you think that UN can prevent such an issue, and to what extent?
Many times throughout the world there are pockets of conflict. And those pockets of conflict sometimes are generated in a manner that benefit some of the individual veto countries, either in the context of the manufacture, purchase, and sale of arms and ammunition and weapons of war. And apart from that, there may be links to that particular country economically. Many times, if the Security Council is allowed to vote freely, independently, and broadly in terms of what the world requires without a veto power, it is my view that many times when those pockets of discord are taking place and the Security Council is in a position to act, it may well prevent potential World War III. Because, as you're aware, many a times world wars and terrible wars have taken place because of one small incident. So this is where, in fact, as I said, I have some concerns with regard to the validity, the continuing validity of the veto power of the major countries in the Security Council.
We always take initiatives towards the environment to protect our environment. So there need to be a certain laws framed. So what are the laws you are going to frame in your court so that people strictly follow it, and there must be a safe ecology for us?
Now, there is, in fact, an organization called the International Law Commission. And they are the ones who are often given the responsibility of creating and suggesting laws or amendments to laws with regard to how either certain United Nations bodies operate, or whether in fact certain particular conventions need to be put in place or need to be amended. So I think in the context of creating environmental law, the International Law Commission is well placed to engage in that exercise. They engaged in that exercise before we had an international criminal court. Because I can recall, at the time, going with the then President Robinson from my country, who is considered to be the father of the International Criminal Court. I remember going with him as his criminal law advisor to the United Nations during those preparatory conferences that were shaping and forming the Rome Statute. And of course, there were many submissions coming from the International Law Commission with regard to procedures and processes of this new court.
It was a heartwarming sight seeing young children interacting with Honorable Chief Justices and dignitaries at the 20th International Conference of Chief Justices of the World. Excerpts.
So, they have some questions, and which they, as they were thinking about the themes of the conference over the last few months, they formulated some questions that they wished to ask. So, we can begin straight away for that.
I am Satyarth Parth from City Montessori School, Rajajipuram 1. So my question is that everyone state that education helps in abolishing corruption. That's one of our roles. But even there, we can observe that even highly educated political leaders are indulged in corrupt activities. And also, many political cases of these kind have also approached to you. So how did your judgment help in dealing with these cases to abolish corruption in the minds of the political leaders, and how you are solving these problems in your countries?
I'm Justice Harnanan from Guyana. Any cases involving criminal offenses, whether it's a corrupt act by a public official, a politician, it will have to be based on the evidence that is presented before the court, for the court to make its ruling. So the investigation into the gathering of evidence, the prosecutorial agencies involved, they will have to ensure that the evidence that is presented before the court is good, it's tangible, it's sufficient to enable a successful prosecution. Judges will have to assess the evidence which is placed before them in order to make a ruling, a judgment.
I would just want to add, you had asked about what judges could do in relation to corruption matters. So, as my colleague rightly said, it all depends on the evidence. So if the evidence is there and it's cogent and a verdict of guilty is appropriate, then that certainly would be entered. What the judge can do in relation to sentencing, that is where your question is probably heading. In sentencing, that is imposing the penalty that's appropriate given all the circumstances. What the judge would do is to not just look at what was done, but look at who did it. And in that particular case, that politician would have breached the trust that the people would have put in him. And so that is one of the factors that a judge would look at in sentencing. And so any judge faced with that kind of case would have a duty to ensure that this politician is treated no differently, that the appropriate sentence is imposed and a lie is not given because of who he is. And I suspect a lot of judges would be moved by the fact that there has been a breach of trust, and that is one important factor that will be taken into account in sentencing.
The definition of a special court, like it happened to my country now, Omar al-Bashir had been adjudicating for Grafit, the president of Sudan, that will lies under a special court. The special court, it has to be enacted by a resolution by the Chief Justice of Sudan. Her name is Lady Justice Ni'mat Muhammad Abdullah, and she formed a court, a special court to trial the anti-corruption, which is, it has a full authority, and the judge there has, as we call it in a Latin term, he has a sui generis decision. That means the decision will be final and last.
Well, Egypt is a developing country. Nonetheless, it's not that bad. Just really, we still have our own resources that really allow us to play a part both at the Arab region level and African level. And sometimes even we go beyond that. And it's all based upon state interest. What does the state, whether the state has an interest in developing contact or relationship with other countries or not. And some of these interests are imposed. They have to do with historical reasons, they have to do with regional reasons, like Egypt is part of the Arab world and also is a part of Africa. And therefore you do have ties with these countries, and you struggle to maintain, develop and advance these ties in future, and therefore you are obliged to get into action with them, trying to help in them whenever you can. Apparently there are limitations, so there are things you can do and things you cannot. But we struggle to do whatever we can do based on whatever resources available to us.
My question is, as the international rule of law remains elusive at places and it has no binding effect, so how it must be implemented so that it has a binding effect to promote world unity?
This is the most strategic question which is awaiting for the strategic answer. In the sense, the conference, for example, now just they are passing a resolution to the effect that the United Nations system should be transformed into an effective system. Why? Because it's not effective. We say it's a toothless dog which bites, which barks, but which does not bite. So what we mean is, it has the name of an international law, but in national laws, you know, we have national laws, and we have the enforcement mechanisms in national laws. In international law, there are international laws, but we don't have the mechanism. And for this reason, one of the contents of the past resolutions is the urgency. I mean, we Chief Justices of the world urge all nations in the world, all heads of states, to do their best to turn the United Nations system into an effective system.
Basement halls consisting of conference rooms number 1 to 7 were kept busy with assigned speakers, sharing information and deliberating many specific world issues.
Topic of discussion here today is creating a culture of unity and peace. Now, this is something which is very close to our hearts, very close to the heart of CMS as the philosophy, as the ethos of our school.
Les guerres prenant naissance dans l'esprit des hommes, c'est dans l'esprit des hommes que doivent être élevées les défenses de la paix.
That's my daily work, to promote peace and justice in the country. I'll just give you a few examples on how this is done.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pranjali Pal of RDSO campus. My question is to Honorable Mr. Dinesh from the country USA. As you said that peace education plays an important role in your country, so how does your country promote methodological principle for education and peace?
So at least every kid should learn and finish the masters, and then there will be tons of chances to take care of life, making money, career.
At this 20th International Conference of Chief Justices of the World, we have gathered to deliberate on establishing the rule of law.
There could be a way how to solve the problem of uniting the world.
So, in my view, rather than looking at the lawmakers and the judges, I think there is a greater volume of work to be done by the teachers of all schools in the world, and of course the student leaders.
You know, within itself, to elevate certain groups that may have been
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بالنسبة للطفل نحن أفردنا محكمة خاصة للطفل بإجراءات خاصة.
Today spoke about spirituality. We think that spirituality actually starts probably after 60 years of age or 70 years of age, when one has no children to bring up or something like this.
El octavo país a nivel mundial que ratifica esta convención como el tratado de derechos humanos más importante que ha tenido a nivel mundial.
In 3, it deals with making of special laws for women, children, right.
Mahmood, Judge Supreme Court Somalia. So we are going to discuss on the topic global governance structure.
इस तरह खेल में डिसीजन मेकिंग भी तुम डेवलप करते हो, जो लाइफ में बहुत बड़ा पार्ट करता है डिसीजन हर स्टेज में.